Welcome to the Women's March Canada podcast, making the equality of women in Canada the new norm. I'm Melissa Durrell. I'll be your host. This is episode 22 titled Ontario, Lawfully Unchained, Inspiring, Uniting, and Leading the Charge for the Advancement of Women Across Canada. Please give a warm welcome to this week's guest, Niki Lundquist. And Niki is a human rights and labour lawyer. That's her profession. And she's currently running for the Ontario NDP for Whitby. She's part of the Migrant Workers Alliance and the Canadian Association of Labour Lawyers. She's a strong community advocate. Niki volunteers on several community-based organizations, from Joanna's House, which is a youth shelter in Ajax, to the Challengers Baseball Program, which helps children with physical disabilities enjoy the sport to their full capability. So I'm really excited to have you here, Niki. And let's get down to brass tacks. Tell me a bit about yourself.
That's always the hardest part, right? Everybody's happy to talk policy or things that aren't about themselves, especially for women, I think. I think I've had a bit of a different path than most people who end up in a political field. I started life a little differently. I was a teenage mom, and it took me a while to sort of straighten out the path that I was going to follow in life. And so eventually I worked my way through school and into law school. And even in law school, I wasn't confident I was going to be a lawyer. And then I just started working and doing some workers' rights in a legal clinic, and it just made sense to me. It was actually a way of addressing some of the disadvantage, understanding that it wasn't going to change the system, but it was really important work nonetheless. Yeah. And I've been really lucky since then.
So how old's your son now, or daughter?
I have two kids now. So I had one early on when I was 18. He's now 28, I hope, because if I'm wrong, I'm not going to hear the end of it. And then I have one who's 12.
Oh, wow. So quite well, good for you for running for politics then. That's amazing. I always, one of the things I find with politicians is sometimes you got to be asked. So who got you to do this?
I honestly got a phone call out of the blue, and someone said, listen, we know you're a progressive woman. We know you live in Whitby. We know it's a tough riding. Come and think about this. And it was funny because when they first came to me, I had said to my spouse, I'm not considering a career in politics. It's just not where I am. And he smiled and he said, if you weren't considering it, we wouldn't be talking about it.
Good point.
A relatively bright man, and he was clearly right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so tell me a little bit then about why you wanted to run.
So I still struggle with fully understanding why I wanted to run, but I think it came down to something really simple, which was people just don't have what they need, you know, on a really basic level. And everything that I heard from people, and I'm engaged in the community in a lot of ways, so many people were just not getting the things that they need, and there was no plan to actually do anything about that. And I was listening a lot. I mean, I can't pretend that I'm not politically aware, even if I wasn't engaged myself. And I kept hearing people saying, we can't do this, we can't do that, or we had to do this, we have to do this. Mm-hmm. And none of these things were actually about doing something that was going to make anybody's lives better. Mm. And it was a choice for me between sitting at home, although I'm not home very often, so it's not really sitting at home, but sitting on planes or trains or in automobiles thinking about these things and deciding that you can do things to make people's lives better. It's a choice, and the choices that we've made haven't done that. So here I am.
You are a good girl. So, it's interesting to me. Obviously, we're talking a lot about Ontario politics these days because the election's coming up. And I find that there's a lot of polarizing discussions that are happening. So you are either we're either spending way too much money and we need to be cutting back, or it seems to me like the conversations are less about how we make lives better. So I think that's why that struck me so much. And it's more about how we get the province back on track financially. And are you hearing that too?
I'm hearing it a lot less than you would expect. So okay. I think the thing about the situation we're in is people recognize that too much debt and deficit is a negative thing, right? So where is that balance between funding the things you need and not putting all of your resources into debt and deficit? because money that goes in there isn't going into the things we need. So there's some of that, but honestly, I think more people are really saying to me and I've been at a lot of doors recently, an awful lot, and mostly what they say to me is, if we haven't done it, why can we do it now? And I said, we haven't chosen to do it. And they kind of agree that there's been this shift to, we take care of corporate interests, we take care of the wealthy, and we don't take care of the rest of us. So I expected, especially in my writing, which is known as a very conservative writing, a bit of a blue sea, I'm not getting what I would have expected on those issues. So when I look online, and online is a dangerous place, if you want to leave feeling good about not being polarized politically. So there is some of that. There are people concerned, and I think that's a legitimate concern for sure. But I think more people are really clear that you can decide with doing different things with what you have. And that's where I am in terms of all of this. I think we can really, really make better decisions about what we fund and how we fund it, and making sure that the basic things that people need, they have.
How does your job as a lawyer, how does that help you as a politician?
Well, so, I am never going to turn down a debate, that's for sure. I think it gives me the capacity to think quickly, which helps. But I think one of the things that people don't really appreciate about law is it's a lot of reflecting, a lot of considering different viewpoints and different arguments and different ways things are constructed, the world of law is constructed. And I don't think policy is very different in a lot of ways from what I do. So you look at all of the various interests that people have, and in my profession, it's generally employers, some workers, unions, whatnot. And you're really dealing with all of those interests and trying to find a path out. I mean, that's what law is essentially, right? If it's kind of a running joke inside my profession, and especially in my particular work environment, that if you actually end up litiging a case, you failed, because there are all kinds of ways to resolve legal issues. And I think that's true of policy too. Good policy is not about polarizing people. It's actually about finding ways to take those interests and find something that best fits. I think that law is very, very complementary to politics, but I also think that there should be more people in politics than just lawyers.
Agreed. I mean, I guess that's really how most of the people were politicians, I guess, at the beginning, but they're all men too. So it's nice to have some female lawyers in there. And labor law is interesting. Is it, what is the diversity around labor lawyers? Do there tend to be more women involved?
No. So no, I think there are still more men, particularly in the sort of upper echelons of the profession, the people who've been practicing for a long time. I think it's still disproportionately men. I think it's changing. One of the challenges, I think, for women is that unions have really been male dominated for a long time, and that's shifting. And so it's shifting in terms of legal representation as well. It's become a much more welcoming place for women, for sure. I know my department has 7 lawyers. 5 of us are women.
Oh, right on.
For sure. And all competent, capable, and there's no question about gender being a part of it. Just really good, strong lawyers and advocates for working people.
Mm-hmm. I'm a city councilor, and so of course I have to deal with labor negotiations quite a bit. And it's interesting because I was in a union for a long time. I worked for CTV, and so I benefited from that for sure. And now I'm on the other side, negotiating. And it is a very interesting place because their salaries are getting higher and higher. And I'm just curious because I have a labor lawyer here. How do we continue to afford this? Like, I look at the Sunshine List, and many of the people on the Sunshine List are their salaries are negotiated by their unions, not by them or anything. It's negotiated by their unions, and it's continuing to grow higher and higher. So, I mean, we're in an interesting place right now in this country, and I'm curious your thoughts.
So I think that we set up a false narrative sometimes when we talk about these things. So I'm not going to sit here and justify the salary of the CEO of Hydro One. It's problematic, right? It's highly problematic, and the public should think so. Now, Doug Ford can't actually fire him, but that's neither here nor there. In terms of
Ford can't do many of the things he says he can do, but anyway, that's another debate.
Share on that too.
Yeah.
But what I would say about it is this. What we should be talking about really is, why have private sector salaries not kept pace with inflation? Why have they not kept pace with the cost of living? Why are those salaries disproportionately low to what has happened in the public sector? And that's a bit of a challenge, and it's going to continue to be a challenge if the salary differential continues to grow. Do I tell you that I think that public sector workers are overpaid? No, I don't. I generally don't think that. I think that you will find examples of people who are overpaid, but I think for the most part, you will find people who work really hard for the incomes they have, and they're grateful to have them. Mm-hmm. I think that, well, it's not that I think that, I know that the salaries in the private sector are often disproportionately low, except in the highest echelons. So what we see, and the thing that nobody wants to talk about, is we have these massive CEO salaries, we have huge benefits to senior level management, and none of that has trickled down to most workers. And that's why people are talking about it, because they feel that they're not getting what the what the public sector is getting.
Yeah.
And that has everything to do with the way, the way the money is structured and where it goes, and it's not going to the people who deserve the raises that they should have had a long time ago.
So what does Ontario look like for you in the future?
Ontario looks to, how far in the future? I think,
Well, I mean, the stuff that you can vision out.
Okay, so the stuff I can vision out is, I think we create a province where we do acknowledge that everybody should have dental care. Everybody should have the drugs they need to take care of themselves and their families. It makes absolutely no sense that we send people home from hospitals and they end up back in there because they can't take the medications that they require. And it happens all of the time. So on a very basic level, those things happen. We review the funding formulas that are rooted back into the Harris days of cuts and freezes. And we actually look at what's going on in terms of the education system, in terms of programming for children with special needs, which is, really problematic at this stage in terms of the funding. We look at all of these funding formulas and we figure out where the money goes and how to make sure that on the most basic level, we have taken care of the people of this province. Mm-hmm. So, those are simple things. I would hope that after the next election, EQAO is gone. So that's the Educational Quality Assessment Office, where we pour massive sums of money into standardized testing for kids, and instead of putting the money into frontline services that they need or into education itself. So that to me is a big thing. I think we have done a really amazing job of creating all of these institutions and organizations and levels of bureaucracy that actually detract from funding on a basic level some of these really important programs. I will use tuition as an example. We keep hearing from government that tuition is free, but it's not. Students are still getting loans and grants. The grant is a bigger portion, but what's really interesting is students get grants, universities get less funding. And so it's actually, it's created this level of bureaucracy that has made things ridiculous. So we have not spent a great deal of time looking into the future to say, education is a public good. There has to be a better way of addressing this system than creating this massive OSAP bureaucracy, for example. That's my personal view of it. I'm sure the party will have its own views of how and what you do to address those things. But it seems to me that the very first thing that we should be doing is taking a look at how do we move forward in this province with an eye to the future. So we're not creating policy for now, which is, I think, what has happened. Every government has created often bad policy to deal with the political demands of now, instead of looking in a forward-thinking way about what does this mean? What does our community look like? What does this province look like in 10 years from now, in 15 years from now? So I think if you're asking me very directly, what do I think needs to happen? I think we need people who are willing to be risky in terms of their own political position to say, these are good policy choices long-term, and we're going to implement them, and we're going to live with the consequences.
Oh, Niki, I hope that follows through for you, for sure. Absolutely. I had a little note here to talk to you about a Girls Inc. breakfast you had. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Oh yeah. So Girls Inc., I have to say I'm not as involved with Girls Inc. as I would like to be, but a friend of mine invited me to a Girls Inc. breakfast. She was recently hired there. Girls Inc. is this amazing organization that is about being bold and bright and strong, and just teaching girls from early on up into teenage life, what that means, and how to be comfortable with you and how to be proud of who you are. So I was at this breakfast yesterday morning, and this young girl with incredible poems stood up and talked about being bullied as a child and how she joined Girls Inc. and how she found a voice and how she was able to come out, and she's 16 years old and she's had a broken heart and she has friends and she's capable. And she stood there, and I sat there in awe of this young woman who had more poise at 16 than I will ever have. And I just thought, this organization is going to change girls into the kind of women that we've all dreamed of becoming, or that we have finally become. Right. I was so honored to be there, and will absolutely become a tremendous supporter of Girls Inc. because of it.
Very cool. Is there anything else you want to share with Women's March? So
yeah, maybe. I think what I would like to say about the Women's March is this. I was one of the people that marched.
Yay!
And I marched both years. So last year, I think I marched because I was so angry. I was just bubbling with rage at what had happened across the border. I think so many of us couldn't believe that we had gone down that road as humanity. Yeah. And so it was really a really interesting march for me last year, because it was jubilant, it was angry, it was all of these things that women are not known for doing in a public way. Yeah. And it was almost like a reigniting of ourselves. And then this year was more personal for me. So I am someone who is a sexual violence survivor. And the Me Too hit me pretty hard this year, as it did with many, many women. But it was what I found really interesting about this year was it didn't feel the same way. The feeling this year, for me at least, was that I had had enough, and I wasn't going to sit quietly, and I was going to march every year if it was necessary until these things didn't continue to happen, until I didn't have to do cases where women had been sexually assaulted at work, where I didn't have to do cases where men denied that their behavior was problematic, even though on an objective basis, everybody would say it was, where I wasn't going to raise my sons to have to say I'm with her because everybody would just know they were with her because of everything they do. So the Women's March to me was just a tremendous signal of women's power that has been lying dormant for a long time as a collective, and just a willingness to step forth and say no more, and here we are, and we're not going away. So I was so honored to be a part of it, and in the smallest way, I was nothing more than anyone else that was a participant, and yet I could feel the vibration almost. It was, some were jubilant, some were angry. There were all kinds of different things. The whys of why people march, were as numerous as their bodies were in the streets both days, both years. But there is something in the air, and women are determined to rise together, and they're going to. I am certain of it more now than I have ever been, and I think I'm certain of it because of the Women's March.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm saying so because it's, I do feel, I think like yourself, it's been a tough professional road for many of us. And now we're looking at that younger generation that many of us are mentoring. And we're just, I feel like you don't have to do what we had to do anymore. And they're actually standing up for themselves in a way I don't think that we did. And so it's a nice little mashup between sort of that Gen X boomer generation and these millennials. And I'm hoping that's the catalyst we need for real change.
Yeah, I think we've got that. There's that spark that is there, and it is ready to ignite. And I just want to say one thing about what you said, though, because I find that really interesting. There are women in every generation who've spoken up, right? There are baby boomers, there are Gen Xers like me, there are the millennials, and then I don't know what the next generation is going to be called. I think it's still up for debate, but they're in the workplace now, some of them, and they are certainly finding their voices sometimes, but I have to tell you, there are still women in every group who don't have voices yet.
Yes.
Who work in workplaces and function in, even on councils, in municipal councils and regional councils, legislatures and in parliament, who haven't been able to find their voices because the systems have been so oppressive to them, so silencing. So I want to say it's a generational thing, but it's not. I think there are more of them now, and I'm glad, but I think we still have a long way to go. And I think that one of the things that I have learned as I practice this kind of law, where I practice human rights in the context of workers' rights, is that it's not us that needs to make the change, it's the men. It's the men in those workplaces who have to see those voices and say they're right, that they are morally right. And I think that's coming. I just think it's a little slower than we all expect.
But we're pushing. Niki,
we are pushing every day.
Yeah, thanks. Give us how we find you. Twitter, Insta, Facebook.
Absolutely. So if you're on Facebook, you can find me at Niki Lundquist for Whitby, or on Twitter at Niki_Lundquist, NIKI_LUNDQUIST. Lundquist is easier for people now ever since the goalie came along. Made a huge difference in my life, like you would not believe, in terms of people spelling my name. But super easy to find, and happy to mentor young women, happy to mentor women my age, happy to work with anyone to build voices in law, in politics, in communities, in every way.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to everyone who tuned in to listen. Your comments are welcomed and encouraged. Please subscribe to our Women's March Canada YouTube channel, and you'll receive an update every single time we upload a new video, which is usually on Fridays. Our mission across Canada is to stand together in solidarity with our partners and children for the protection of our rights, our safety, our health, and our families, recognizing that our vibrant and diverse communities are the strength of our country. This is Women's March Canada podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Durrell. You can find us at Women's March CDA and on our website, womensmarch.com, womensmarchcanada.com. Let's get that one right. Have a great weekend, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye. And we are done.
Awesome. Thank you so much.